Patek Philippe is one of the most exclusive watchmakers in the world. If a Rolex is like the watch equivalent of a Porsche, then Patek Philippe would be the equivalent of Rolls-Royce. Welcome back to the Vintage Watch Collector, and in this episode we're going to highlight Patek Philippe's colourful history, what makes their watches so exclusive, and how they became the masters of the watch complication. The company can trace its roots back to 1839, when it was originally formed by Antoine Norbert de Patek. Originally from Poland, he was a deeply religious man and a soldier in the Polish army. In the army, he was involved in Poland's failed uprising against invading Russian forces, and for that reason he had to exile himself from his beloved home country in 1831. He eventually settled in Geneva, Switzerland, where he entered into a new vocation of watchmaking. In 1839, he formed his third company, François-Czapek & Co., in partnership with another Polish émigré, François-Czapek. The business partnership lasted 6 years until the two men decided to go their own separate ways. So Antoine Patek, wanting to find a new business partner to advance his watchmaking business, heard of an innovative watchmaker from Paris called Jean-Adrien Philippe. Jean Philippe was an inventive watchmaker and had patented a keyless winding and hand-setting mechanism. In other words, these tasks could be performed by the use of the crown of a watch. This was back then a huge breakthrough, as pocket watches had to be wound and set by the use of a separate key. Keys were easy to lose and the keyholes let in dirt and moisture, which meant that the mechanism inside would either break or become inaccurate over time. Jean-Philippe's invention paved the way for modern dive watches, as it meant that over time the watch case could be made water resistant. Philippe agreed to join the business with Patek as a partner, and the company changed its name to Patek Philippe & Co. in 1851. The company saw initial success as they continued to build on and improve watches built around their crown winding system. However, Patek realized that in order for the company to survive and thrive, they must sell their watches to international clientele, and began making business journeys abroad. In the same year of 1851, Patek and Philippe both went to the grandly titled Great Exhibition of the Works of Industry of All Nations, held in the Crystal Palace building of Hyde Park in London. With exhibitors from all around the world there, it was a chance for Patek Philippe to show off their watches to the rest of the world. England's reigning queen, Queen Victoria, was suitably impressed by their watches that she purchased 2 during the exhibition, one for herself and one for her husband, Prince Albert. Not content with the success in London, Patek even went across the Atlantic to New York, a journey which would then take weeks rather than hours. Whilst there, he successfully negotiated with the famous jewellers Tiffany's to stock Patek Philippe products. The Calatrava cross is a symbol that the company uses today as its brand logo, which they first registered in 1887. As mentioned, Patek was a deeply religious man, and the Poles were denied religious freedom in their own country during the time when Patek had to flee Poland. The Calatrava cross was a symbol used by an order of Catholic Spanish knights in the 12th century that successfully defended their country against the invading Moors. It was therefore apt that the cross should become a symbol of Patek Philippe after Patek regained his religious freedom in his new home of Geneva. The symbol can be found on the winding crown of all modern Patek watches. It even appears in the movement of some models, and legend has it that it brings good luck to its wearer. The two owners carried on running the company right up until their final days. What made the company work was the complementary relationship between the two. Philippe, being the master watchmaker and innovator, came up with further inventions that would project mechanical watch technology forward. This included what's known as the slipping mainspring, which is a mainspring mechanism that could not be overwound. This paved the way for automatic winding watches. Patek, being a savvy businessman, was able to get their watches sold all over Europe, Russia and America. He also ensured that their watches were highly decorated with artisanal touches, making them highly desirable and sought after. After the owners passed, the company continued in the hands of relatives and employees in the form of a partnership. It wasn't until 1901 that the partners at the time decided to secure a more stable future for the company and floated the company by selling shares. In the early part of the 20th century, the company continued to grow and prosper. The American economy was booming again after the ending of the First World War. This was the roaring 20s and also a golden age for Patek Philippe.
Hot feet, stinging like a busy bee. Hot feet, smoke like a chimney. Hot heat, burning terribly, nearly makes furnace
During this time, there was a race between two wealthy American watch collectors to collect the most prestigious watches. The two collectors were car manufacturer James Ward Packard and banking tycoon Henry Graves Jr. Even though the two never met, they commissioned Patek Philippe to produce some of the most complicated and expensive watches ever made. The race was won by Henry Graves Jr., who commissioned the company to produce the most complicated watch it had ever made up until then. The watch became known as the Graves Supercomplication and had a total of 24 complications. This included a perpetual calendar that automatically adjusts for leap years up until the year 2100, various chimes and repeater functions, a moon phase dial, and a map of the celestial sky over Graves' New York apartment. It took Patek Philippe 3 years to research and design the watch and 5 years to produce it. With over 900 individual components, the engineering and watchmaking skills that went into making this watch was, needless to say, quite an achievement. Especially considering that it was made long before computer-aided design became available. The Graves' Supercomplication watch recently came up and was sold at auction in November 2014 for a staggering $24 million, making it the most expensive watch ever sold. You can see why Patek Philippe watches make excellent investment pieces. All was going well for the company right up until 1929, because this was the start of the Great Depression. Banks were failing, stock prices were falling, unemployment was growing, and people were buying less. America also put on an import duty on imports from Europe to protect American companies, meaning that Patek Philippe was not selling as many watches to their US customers. Despite owning a list of patents to its name and having some affluent clientele, the company found itself in financial trouble and looked for a new buyer to bail them out. Help came from one of their suppliers. There was a company called Fabrique de Cadran Stern Frères, which translated means Stern Brothers Dial Manufacturers. They supplied dials to Patek Philippe as well as other watch manufacturers. This company was run by two brothers, Jean and Charles Stern, and they acquired a majority share of Patek Philippe in 1932. The Sterns hired John Pfister, who came from another Swiss watchmaking house, as technical director of the company. The Sterns, along with Pfister, realized that in order to get the company profitable again, they needed to introduce a new model to broaden the appeal of Patek Philippe to a wider base beyond high-end collectors and still maintain the firm's reputation as a leader in Swiss watches. Later that year, they released what was to become the watch that saved Patek Philippe, the Calatrava Ref 96. This dress watch was named after the company's emblem and designed by the English horologist David Penny. The Calatrava followed the Bauhaus school of design, meaning that form followed function. Any superfluous design touches that were not necessary were removed, which was quite a contrast from the previous decade's Art Deco era. It was elegant in its design and became a blueprint for all dress watches that followed. Early Calatrava watches had movements made by Lecoutre, but Jean Pfister also decided to bring movement making back in-house, and they were fitted with an 18-jewel Patek Philippe movement from about 1934 onwards. Nearly all of the Calatrava Ref 96 models were made of either gold or platinum. Patek Philippe also produced a stainless steel case version to make the watch more accessible. However, these are rare and still command a high value on the vintage market due to their popularity amongst collectors. The reforms put in by the Sterns and their staff paid off, and after nearly 2 decades the company was back on its feet. Along the way, the company added further technical innovations and complications to their lineup, such as adding a model with a perpetual calendar and a double chronograph to their range. The next event that came along to shake up the company came along in the 1970s. A new technology was emerging which could keep time far more accurately than mechanical watches, and although it was initially expensive, the prices would eventually come down to a fraction of the cost of mechanical movement, and that technology was the quartz movement. The quartz movement was first used in the Seiko Astron, which was first revealed in 1969. Patek Philippe's initial response was to become a part of a collaboration of 20 Swiss watch companies to develop a Swiss quartz movement. The result was the Beta 21 movement, and Patek Philippe produced a few hundred quartz watches using it. This watch was the reference 3587. Soon after, Patek Philippe realized that going down the quartz route was going to dilute their brand image, and so in a move that seemed to be counterintuitive to other watch companies at the time, They increased their prices and concentrated on the mechanical movement and introduced a new sector of watches. In the 1970s, there were essentially only two sectors of watches: the luxury dress watch, which were made of either gold or platinum, or sports watches, which were made mainly of steel and were seen as tools and not a luxury item. Patek Philippe decided to enter a newly created third category, the luxury sports watch. Their main competitive rival, the high-end Swiss watchmaker Audemars Piguet, had released a highly desirable luxury sports watch made of steel, the Royal Oak, in 1972, and so Patek Philippe had to react. They couldn't be left without a watch in this sector, and so in 1976 they released their first luxury sports watch, the iconic Nautilus. The Nautilus was first released in 1976 as the reference 3700. It not only helped Patek Philippe to survive the quartz revolution, which wiped out many independent Swiss watchmakers, but it helped to broaden the appeal of their watches to a wider and younger audience. It is still in production today, but has become a range of watches with different sizes and complications. The company still remains in the hands of the family that saved them from financial ruin in the 1930s, the Sterns. Today it is run by Thierry Stern, the great-grandson of Charles Stern, and is the last family-owned independent watchmaker in Geneva. That's it for now, and thank you for watching the video. This has been Roger from the Vintage Watch Collector, and I'd like you to press the subscribe button if you haven't already done so, and leave a comment down below. I'll leave you with an image of one of Patek Philippe's beautiful watches, and see you next time.